Just today, a woman sleeping on the subway set on fire and killed. A man, just after midnight last night, stabbed to death on a subway platform. Then there is the recent Daniel Penny verdict, all reminders that echo an infamous case 4 decades ago that was portrayed as a fed-up crime victim striking back. 40 years ago today, on December 22nd, 1984, Bernhard Goetz shot 4 black teens on the subway who he said were out to rob him. He was dubbed the subway vigilante. Goetz, thrown into the national headlines and New York City lore, portrayed as a fearful, angry, everyday man striking back against rapid crime in self-defense. Critics, though, called him a racist, and he went on to trial for attempted murder and criminal possession of a weapon, found not guilty of the shooting, but did serve 8 months in jail for having an illegal handgun. Here is part of Goetz's confession tape to police in Concord, New Hampshire, when he turned himself in.
The system. What if, just for example, if people were on the subway system then, what if the whole system geared up and went to work against this lawlessness, this atrocity? What if someone else in that subway system were butchered? And the guys, you think the guys would have been caught? You think it would have been any big thing? It would have been one more statistic, and don't nod your head yes, because you know better. And if you don't know better, you just don't know New York.
With us now is one of the jurors who cleared Bernhard Goetz of the shootings, Mark Leslie. He wrote the book, Subway Gunman, a juror's account of the Bernhard Goetz trial. Mark, good to see you. Sadly, under the horrible news of this horrible case in Brooklyn where a woman was set on fire in the subway. We just heard Bernhard Goetz 40 years ago talk about lawlessness. What was the atmosphere back in 1984, and how would you compare that to today?
I don't spend much time on the subways of New York anymore like I did 40 years ago. But if you were approached, it was for money. Today, more and more, we see people who are mentally ill. I guess that's the big difference I see. Maybe it's only because that's what I hear on the news.
Do you think that is more threatening or more dangerous? Do you fear that, many people say the government has failed us when it comes to properly treating and dealing with the people who suffer from mental illness and can turn violent?
Well, that goes all the way back to 1977 when New York State closed numerous mental hospitals and essentially dumped those people out on the streets of New York City. And we've been playing catch up ever since.
Bernhard Goetz, I talked to him. He's not doing an interview, but he told me, as you just said, there's a quote. Goetz says, quote, "Today it's mostly crazy people on the street and the subways who are off their meds. I take the subways and tend to avoid trouble." Is there a way, do you think, the government get a handle on this? I mean, after the Goetz case back then, crime in the subways and these type of issues were at the forefront, but it seems that it hasn't been able to be successfully dealt with.
Well, it costs money. The reason they were dumped on the streets was to save money. So unless it becomes a big enough priority where people are wanting to spend the necessary funds, it's going to continue.
Goetz, in his confession tape, it's a pretty searing tape. He gave up more than a week, like 8 days after the shooting. And in that time, because he ran out of the subway tunnel and he was this fleeing, visage and image, people liking him to Charles Bronson, a vigilante, critics, of course, saying he was a racist murderer, attempted murderer. The 4 young men lived, one was paralyzed. What captured that at that time, that he was this striking back? I mean, there was such anger and frustration. Crime was much worse then than it is today.
Well, people are afraid of being attacked, whether they're going to be or not. The fear is real. And there's an additional fear on a subway because there's nowhere to escape. And Bernie went into a fight or flight state of mind. The world goes black and white. I've experienced it myself. And your memory becomes very unreliable. Some of the things he said in the videotape did not happen the way that he was describing them because his memory was not reliable, specifically about the Darrell Cabey shooting, where he claimed to have gone up to him and said, "You look all right, here's another," and shot him in cold blood, whereas all the medical and scientific evidence proves that did not happen.
Part of the confession tape, he said this. I'm going to read this to you. Quote, "It is unbearable for people to live in fear. People who are violent are just let back on the street again and again and are charged with nothing. The legal system is a joke. It doesn't serve the people." You know, today we hear frustrations, the very same thing. Bail reform, one suspect in the subways arrested 46 times and let out. Finally, you were a part of the jury that acquitted Goetz of the actual shooting. What would you like to see? What should have happened over the last 40 years to try to make all of us safer?
Well, I'm not an expert to be able to make these decisions, but again, dealing with mental health is a hugely expensive proposition. We have to be willing to spend the money. These people are as ill as someone who has cancer, but it's much easier for us to feel sympathy for a person with cancer. Mental illness can actually make it very difficult for the people who love the ill people to take care of them. It's not an easy, oh, I just have a answer for you kind of problem.
Those who do suffer from mental illness must be cared for, and sadly, they're falling through the cracks, as we see so often. And finally, Mark, can you tell the audience, those who don't know about the case, you know, why did the jury find him not guilty? What did you think was going in his mind? You believe that he had reasonable fear?
Well, you brought up the key aspect, which is reasonableness. And we did not have to decide that he was reasonable. We did not decide that he was reasonable. We decided the district attorney had not proven to us that he wasn't reasonable. And that was the burden of proof. Many of us were still in a gray area as to how we felt about it, but our job was just to decide, did they prove he was unreasonable? If not, he was not guilty.
Mark Leslie, a juror in the Bernhard Goetz case, which 40 years later, after 4 decades, still raises some of the very same crime issues that we're dealing with today. Mark, thank you for coming in. Good to see you.
Thank you.
Hey, Sean Hannity here. Hey, click here to subscribe to Fox News YouTube page and catch our hottest interviews and most compelling analysis. You will not get it anywhere else.